Okay, everybody, grab a seat and welcome. My name is Ian Butler. I'm just facilitating for this session to get started and introduce these guys. Anyone who was here last time. Callum, Eastwood and Paul Edwards, and working on the workplace, on our workplace, how we're going to make our workplace better.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming. Back-to-back sessions in this room, so I'm just tuning into what this topic's about. But we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the work that we're doing around improving options to improve workplaces and how to change the job. And my name's Callum. I'm going to do the first half, and then Paul Edwards is going to jump in, hopefully from about halfway. So I guess some of you may have known why the title says change the job, some may not. Over the last 2 years, the dairy sector has worked to come up with a plan called the Great Futures in Dairy Plan. And this is kind of a guiding document for identifying what the challenges are around our workplaces, but also what can we do about it to more easily retain and attract people on farm. I'll probably say it a couple of times, but if anyone wants a copy of the plan, there's just some sitting there beside the door, but also it's on our website. You can have a bit of a look through if you're interested. So the plan was developed with farmers and other stakeholders. It was released about a year ago, so a lot of the work that we do at DairyNZ in the workplace space is aligned with this plan. And there's 3 parts to the plan. There's work around sort of shaping up in the workplace. There's work around looking in new places for people to come and work on our farms. Where else can we find future employees? And then there's an area called change the job. So what are the things that we can do to improve the workplace, the dairy workplace? And this is the area that I guess we work in, hence the title of the talk today. So you'll know all these things, but I guess why do we need to look at changing the job? Some of the reasons, is around hours of work and trying to reduce the total hours that people are working on farm, and can be pretty unattractive to people looking to come into the sector, but also when those hours are. So there's this idea of unsociable hours, so really early hours in the day, or even sort of later when you want to be home with your family. So those sort of shoulders of the day. Coming to work and being able to go home safely is pretty important in any job, and in dairying and in other agricultural sectors, we have some areas to work on there. We have a project, you might have seen our stand downstairs around reducing sprains and strains. That's sort of just one part of the injury issue on farm, but trying to make our jobs safer, but also easier and less physical is one of our challenges. We have to try and meet the expectations of the future workforce, whoever they are or will be, and that's always changing. What people want from a job is always changing. So they are the customer, they are the audience for us, so we have to think about what kind of job do they want, otherwise they won't come and work in our sector. Also, it's going to be an ongoing challenge to find people to work on our farms, so trying to, I guess, increase productivity to be able to do what we do potentially with less people, or increase our output, our productivity with the same amount of people is a challenge. And with attracting people, we also are looking at how do you add more flexibility into the workplace, because that's what people are asking for is more flexibility about, I guess, the kind of work they're doing, the roles they have, and when they work. So the kinds of research that we do in this space at DairyNZ, or have been doing over the past few years, we work pretty closely with farmers, so we always trying to do this thing that's called, it's really just collaboration, but nowadays it's called co-design. So we're working with small groups of farmers or testing ideas or listening to farmers about what kind of work needs to be done. One of the big focus areas for our last couple of years has been around this workplace productivity. What is workplace productivity, and where are we at, and what are our options for improving it? So we'll talk about that today. You would have seen a lot of work in the last 3 or 4 years around flexible milking options, and we've just sort of come to the end of a large project around looking at flexible milking. What's the impacts of flexible milking? Who might it work for? We're also at the moment re-looking into once a day as an option. What are the things that we could do to make full season once a day more of an option for more farmers? And we're doing some work around this sprains and strains side of things, and linked to that, actually looking into sleep on farms. And I heard somewhere recently that the best drug that you can take is sleep. And obviously on farms and on dairy farms in particular, every half hour extra sleep you get is pretty valuable. So we've been working with farmers across the country trying to understand what sleep they're getting and what the options might be for improving. So first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that productivity side of things that we've been working on. So I guess the first question is, what is productivity? Often we talk about efficiency, and we're very good at talking about milking kind of metrics and milking efficiency because it's the easiest thing to measure. Essentially, how many cows are you milking per hour or per person? They're pretty easy. More general sort of productivity across the workplace is pretty difficult to work out if you're highly kind of productive or efficient across the day or not. The graph that's up there on your left-hand side, I just put up for an example. It's some recent work that came out of a group in Australia where they compared what's really an efficiency metric of cows per FTE across different countries. And you'll see the top line, I think it's black, that's New Zealand. So we're winning. We're beating Australia, we're beating America in cows per FTE, and we're mostly doing that because of our pasture-based system. So the US with their TMR, it just takes more time in the day to feed in particular. One thing I note when I see that graph is it's flatlined. We may be ahead, but we've flatlined. So what's happened there? Why are we not sort of still increasing in terms of that efficiency metric? The other thing to note, I didn't put it up there, but it's one metric. So there's other data in the report by David Becker, which shows that the US are actually more efficient at kilograms milk solids per FTE. So because they've got higher producing cows and their systems, so it depends how you look at it about whether you're a highly efficient farm or not. And this is why we've been doing some work and looking at the idea of productivity, as sort of a more general concept about, it's not just about how fast you do your work, but it's about kind of the quality of your work and that you don't have to go back and fix it or do something else. So it's around efficiency. So we've been working with QCons in the last sort of 5 months to survey 150 farms across the country to look at their workplace productivity. So I don't know if anyone in the room got shoulder tapped or put their hand up to be part of that. It was about a 90-minute sit-down session, fairly intensive, and looking at trying to unpick hours to run a farm per year, hours in different seasons it takes to run the farm, even on the right-hand side here on the bottom graph, a breakdown of how many hours it takes to do tasks on farm in different times of the year. So we've recently just finalised that data set, and so we're just now analysing it to see what is the range, with farms with larger farms, smaller farms, different farm systems, what's the range in workplace productivity, and essentially with the aim of creating something like Dairy Base but for workplaces, that you'd be able to log onto our website and put some details in about your farm and see where you sit compared to other similar farms. And the idea is that then you could see whether there's an opportunity to change something. Also, we're looking at, is there an impact of different technologies and practices on the productivity of different workplaces across the country? So I talked a bit about efficiency and productivity, so doing more things or things faster, but of course that's not the only thing that's going to make an attractive workplace. So in our research we've also been looking at other things, and one of them is around well-being. Obviously working on farm can be tough and can be quite isolating actually. Even on large farms we've had people tell us that they feel they're out there day by day, not actually talking to many of their team members, and it can be quite isolating. So in some of our projects we've been trying to look at, if you implement things like once a day milking or flexible milking that's supposed to make the workplace better, do we get a change in well-being? And the first thing we found is it's bloody hard to measure well-being, especially with our small farm team. So you've got maybe 1 or 2 or 5 in your team, and if you've had a bad day, your answers to a survey and things will go up and down. So we've tried sending little pulse surveys every fortnight to ask teams how they're going, ask longer surveys. So what we found was none of those sort of suited. So recently we've been working with a company called Scarlatti, who have been out talking to farmers, looking internationally for wellbeing studies, and we've just recently come up with a farmer-focused wellbeing assessment tool. So the aim of that is that we'll be able to take the pulse of the dairy sector maybe once a year or in particular projects, and the questions are much more relevant to farming and hopefully much easier to understand for the range of people that work on our farms. So I guess keep an eye out for that. Some of the other work we've been doing with farmers is looking to increase team engagement and flexibility. So you may have heard of the You Choose system that came out of Align Farms down south. That was out of one of our projects that when we'd been working with farmers about 4 years ago, and the idea is that farm actually built their own app. The farm team, like 2 weeks ahead, can choose which parts of the day they work. So the day is broken into 3 4-hour shifts, so a 12-hour day, and you choose 2 of those shifts. You're only allowed to do 8 hours a day. And so if you have to pick up the kids on a Wednesday, you choose the first 2 shifts, and you may have to negotiate with your teammates to get the shift you want, but it's been very successful within that team in particular in providing more choice. And the other part about sort of providing flexibility and increasing engagement is around better communication and task scheduling. So we've done a lot of work around Kanban, the Kanban boards, which is the thing on the right here. I won't discuss it in much detail, but we have some great videos on our website if you search Kanban. The idea is you get the tasks out of your head as the owner or manager, have them up on the board, and work with your team on a regular, maybe weekly basis to allocate tasks, and they take control of those particular tasks. So it really adds with ownership within the workplace. And the last couple of things I wanted to cover that have come out of our projects, we've seen, I guess, the current generation that's coming into our farms, or the generation that will come into our farms, want to learn in a different way. They want to learn point in time, little and often, a lot of audio-visual kind of learning. And so, and we've also seen people that are really talented within our farms get promoted really quickly to be a manager, and maybe don't have the people skills. They have really technical skills. So we worked with a teacher and a coach that was based in Auckland to develop a course that built leadership skills and actually talked about emotional intelligence with sort of 2IC level farmers, and a project we called Emerging Leaders. It's now in a course that's available. You could sign up to it. If you search Emerging Leaders Dairy, you should find it. And it's like a 3-month course that's really built around how people learn on dairy farms. So this little and often idea, you mostly online, so you can jump on during a lunch break. You don't have to take the whole day off. And the use of specialised apps for micro-learning, where you learn a little bit every day, and a lot of sort of coaching and keeping in touch. And the last thing that I wanted to cover that came out of some of our work was also around kind of standard operating procedures and how to engage the team and keep people up to speed with things that need to be done without a long written list of standing operating procedures. So we discovered this tool that's called Nobi that was actually developed by a dairy farmer who now lives in Tasmania. And it's a really simple way of creating sort of your SOPs, but using little video clips, a little bit of text, maybe some photos. So you can scan that QR code. If you should be able to read that with your phones. That'll take you to some Nobis that we created at DairyNZ around some training tools. But as a farmer, you could use that yourself. You need to subscribe to the system, of course, but you can very easily make your own Nobis. All right, that's my part of it, and I'll pass over to Paul to talk about sort of some of our work design projects.
Cool. So work design and hours. So I just wanted to start here, actually focusing on start time. So the hours of work, and I think we've spent a bit of time talking about hours of work over the last 5 years. This was a new way I saw of sort of monetising what the value of those hours are. And so this was a survey of 18 to 35-year-olds that are currently working in sort of jobs that might be easy for them to switch into working in farming. And they were asked the question, how much more time would you need to be paid to be convinced to start before 5 a.m? And you can see either of those, whatever those two options are, essentially these systems are unattractive to bringing new people into the dairy industry by and large. So we've got to be looking at ways of managing our farms differently to try and avoid some of these, minimise anyway the number of early starts ultimately. So milking intervals are a key part to determining that start time. So this was some data from a survey of about 500 farms a few years ago, and ultimately it seemed most farmers were prioritising getting the workday done and finished by about 5 o'clock, which meant as you got larger and larger farms or larger and larger herds, those start times crept earlier and earlier. And so, for example, just looking at 40-a-side dairies with 40 clusters, whether they be herringbones or rotaries, using a 10 and 14 hour milking interval, which is sort of our traditional 5 a.m, 3 p.m. type time. 40 clusters, you can, once you get past about 500 cows, basically you have to start before 5 a.m. in order to milk them in enough time. However, changing to something like an 8 and 16 hour interval, you could be suddenly, there's a lot more cows you could be milking. There's a lot longer essentially before you need to start milking before 5 a.m. And so that's a 5 a.m. milking start time. That's probably a 4 a.m. at least alarm clock going off to go and get the cows type thing, right? So there's considerable opportunity here to adapt our milking intervals to start later. And so farmers are doing that to an extent. So in the same survey, as those herd sizes got larger, that milking interval did change from about, heading towards that 10 hours down to about 9.5. But there's still an hour and a half on the table there in terms of our ability to essentially start later. And so that early, not only is it unattractive, but it actually does have a cost to it as well. So this was a study we did where we put some sleep monitoring equipment on 33 farmers. It was just a bit of a pilot study. And they had them on before the start of calving. And you can see from this middle one, here's the waking up time. So as more and more cows calved, the herd got larger, milking times got longer, they started getting up earlier and earlier, as you'd expect. Overall though, it meant that their sleep time decreased, right? So essentially, the kind of net effect here is that, if you're having to get up earlier and earlier, in order to get a standard kind of sleep time, remembering we're aiming for that 8 hours, you're suddenly needing to go to sleep at sort of 8, 9 o'clock, which for a lot of people, they don't want to do that because you want to watch some TV, hang out with the family. You essentially can't go to bed kind of early enough to offset that really early start, right? And so that fatigue, if you look at the number of hours, like it's less than 7 hours, getting down towards 6 hours of sleep, that's like in the danger zone in terms of fatigue, making mistakes on farm, getting injured, etc., etc. Even from a management perspective, just making good decisions becomes more and more challenging, right? So the good news is we do have some options. So we could be more efficient with our milking, and so we've said that we've been talking about those kind of things since about 2010 in terms of Milk Smart, using max T, maximum milking time, getting our milking routine sorted, in our herringbone, the order we do our tasks in, rotation time and rotary dairies. Cupping techniques is a key task that you're doing within that milking routine and getting really efficient there. Liner selection and pulseration ratio, both things that you could be playing around with to increase the efficiency, the speed at which milk can be harvested, to ultimately shrink the time of milking. And so if we can make milking faster, we could end at the same time and therefore start later. We've got opportunities in our milking intervals, which I've talked about sort of already really there, where both New Zealand and Irish research has said, concluded that there was no significant production differences between an even 12 to 12 hour interval and an 8 and 16 hour interval. And you can see this is some data from 2 years ago now of herds across the country. I think this was 6,000 Fonterra suppliers, where most people are still sitting in that traditional 10 and 14 through to maybe 9 and 15 type hour interval, which says for the majority there's an opportunity to start 1 to 2 hours later by changing those milking intervals. Now, yes, that does mean your workday is compressed, and I guess that's normally the one challenge that people put back to me, well, how do I get all the jobs done on farm? And that's a fair point. It just puts the emphasis back on things like this and some of the things Callum talked about in terms of being really efficient about when we're working, being really efficient in getting those jobs done so that we can start later and reduce the hours effectively. And then third option there is around milking frequency. So once a day milking, obviously you can milk at any time in the day. It does surprise me the number of once a day farmers that still milk at 5 a.m. No need to be doing that. 3 and 2, 10 and 7, now we're starting to open up every 3 or 4 days. 3 or 4 days a week. We don't have that same early start that we used to, and there's many people starting to give this a go. You can look through the flexible milking, sort of this yellow box here, how that's increased, as well as the number using part season or full season once a day. It's probably a little bit more complex to adopt. It's not just as simple as dropping a milking. You probably do need to look at your system and make sure that there's other changes that you might need to make alongside it, but there's definitely opportunity and scope to make some gains in that space. It kind of goes without saying, but is also worth reminding people of all of these things that you're doing, actually you need to start later in order to achieve that goal, right? Because it's very easy, like the once a day example where I'm still going to milk at 5 a.m. even though I'm once a day. Just a big question mark, right? I think that's all on that one. So just moving into some of those health and safety, the sprains and strains that Callum mentioned, there's some displays downstairs, linking back again to that sleep that I talked about in terms of injuries. So ACC have a scheme called Injury Prevention Grant, and they 3 years ago, the theme of that was around sprains and strains, and they were looking at options for workplace structural or engineering options to try and minimise strains and sprains. So not thinking about behaviour change like telling people about the benefits of, bend your knees, lift with your knees, not your back, those kind of things, but actually trying to do some redesign of workplaces to make them safer. And we saw that as an opportunity to work with farmers, develop some solutions that actually tick some of our other workplace goals, like saving time and making the job easier, while also making it safer. And so that project, there's kind of three steps to that. It was some work at the start, identifying where most of the injuries were occurring, so we focus our efforts in the most valuable place essentially. go through a co-design exercise to develop some prototypes. So we've had, I think, 3 or 4 co-design workshops now with farmers and ergonomics experts, et cetera, to develop some prototypes and actually go and test them out on farm, which is I'm just going to finish up by quickly walking you through some of those. One of those ideas was the risk was around loading calves into trailers. So most of our trailers are kind of multi-purpose use on farm. They're not really designed in an ergonomic kind of way for picking up calves. And so looking at options for hands-free kind of loading with like a saloon gate, that working with care actually that you could retrofit to their trailer. So you're not like having to buy a whole new trailer. You could be slotting in a gate that makes it much easier to load calves into those trailers. Kind of actually playing on that idea a bit. Another one, moving calves between facilities, and not even moving calves, but moving yourself. So, the number of injuries from sort of climbing up with your boots over railings and things like that, or steel gates. Actually using that saloon gate idea and sort of prefabricating that within your standard 12-foot gates that many calf sheds are kind of built around, so that making easy access for you and calves to move between pens. Milking ergonomics, so one of the issues we identified there, particularly for smaller cows, because we've got crossbred herds, we've got quite a range in cow sizes in many cases, where in rotaries, smaller cows moving towards the front of the bale, meaning you have to stretch further and putting strain on that body for holding that cluster out. So looking at flexible breast rail options to help. For those larger cows, they can still push into that bale, but for smaller cows that they're encouraged to be at the back of the bale closest to reach. Another one around cupping, so think about the weights. There's lots of things you can do to adjust the weight of your clusters, but ultimately you are still holding that with one hand in kind of quite an outstretched position. Options for how we could do that so that you could milk with using both hands 2 clusters at a time. So attach. So not only do we get the speed kind of benefits of that, but that you're using both arms in an even kind of way so that you're not putting undue strain on one of those arms. And then finally, in the PPE type space, I put this last because generally in the sort of health and safety in terms of options, you're trying to eliminate the injury occurring. Whereas generally speaking, PPE is about sort of acknowledging the injuries. The event is going to happen, and it's about minimising the sort of severity of it, but still could be quite valuable. Exosuits in terms of, again, aiding with that lifting of calves or carrying things, even milking, again, the outstretched nature of that, as well as the footwear where, again, we have very multi-purpose kind of footwear that we ask to do a lot of things that probably it can't do. So actually looking at providing some data so people can make informed purchasing decisions about what that particular gumboot design is good for in terms of a range of attributes. So just in summary, there's a range of workplace productivity metrics that Callum mentioned. It's not kind of simple as just one thing like cows per FTE. Hours and start times in particular are really important at a number of levels, but in particular attracting that next generation of farmers to come through. We've got lots of options at the moment that are on the table, but in particular looking forward where we're focusing our efforts, that workplace productivity survey that Cal mentioned, really unpicking what are those levers what are the existing practices people are doing that are making them really efficient, as well as looking at once-a-day adoption, which some of you may groan over that, but the reality is that we think there's a lot more people that could benefit from that system, as in like maintain profitability with that system, than are currently doing it. So understanding a bit more about what those barriers are for them, as well as these injury solutions and actually getting some of them out there in the market so that you can be benefiting from them. Questions?
Anyone who wants to answer a question to the microphone. So, who's got a question?
Sorry to be a bit of a devil's advocate. to a bit of the slides. How easy does it need to be, and what does that do to the next generation, kind of industry-wide? Like, you need a bit of grit and, to get ahead in life. So how easy does it need to be, I guess, is a question.
Yeah, I guess the answer to that is who's coming to work on your farm. So, like, if there's people who are keen to get in, work hard, they'll be attracted to dairy. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who want something different from a job, and maybe aren't so interested in the pathway through to ownership and stuff. They're looking for a good quality job. We'll need them because we don't have enough people lining up to take our jobs. So unfortunately, no matter what we think about how the job should be done, actually it's they are the audience that we're talking to. They're the ones we're trying to get to come and do a job for us. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer. Only thing to add is, I guess, just look at history and wind the clock back 100 years and all the manual labour and things like that. I mean, it's kind of human nature that we try and make our jobs easier, ultimately. So it's just continuing that trend.
Can I also just add to that I work for the Rural Support Trust, and one of the things we see the most in dairy farmers is burnout, because we tell the people coming to work for us that it's just got to be done and you've just got to get it done. So they get on and they get it done until they can't do it anymore, and then they're burnt out and they don't want to work in the industry anymore because we're asking too much for them, and they can get paid more money to do less work somewhere else. So, and that isn't just the workers, that's the farm owners too. We're putting too much on their shoulders and expecting too much from them, and they just can't keep doing it at that rate. It's just not sustainable. And I did also have a question. With like a lot of this stuff, I was wondering, with your studies, have you kind of looked at how different breeds of cows adapt to different methods? Because with some of the other stuff we've been looking at today, I worry that if we try doing too much, we're going to be doing clashing things. Like the 24-month milking system we were talking about, in my mind, is far more suited to bigger breeds of cows, and yet once-a-day milking systems, in my mind, are far more suited to smaller breeds of cows. Have you been looking at that kind of side of things?
Not a whole lot, other than to agree that different options aren't always complementary. But I think we also don't want to be in a place where we are all doing the same thing. Like, diversity is a good thing. We're in the business of providing options to farmers ultimately. So, yeah, not everything's going to suit everyone. We can't please everyone.
Yeah, and I guess to your earlier point about burnout and things like that, that's been the really interesting thing about the Reducing Sprains and Strains project. It wasn't an area, without that funding, we wouldn't have ever looked into that area. But, when you start to look at what's happening on farm, you or someone in your team hurts their back, instead of having enough time to stop and get that fixed, we just work on, and then it gets worse and worse, or we get things that are built up over time that we haven't addressed properly. So, there's a lot to be gained from doing things easier on farm, or providing ourselves the space for those people to get well again and come back into the team. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Back there.
Okay. Oh, no.
Your video on that calf trailer was actually quite interesting. I got sent that by two of my staff members. First time they sent me a DairyNZ short video, but when is it going to be commercialised?
Yeah. Well, it depends how much you want to pay. You could get it tomorrow.
Like, is it going to be around for this spring, or do I tell them you've got to wait a couple of years?
But the plan we have for the project is to prove it one more time this spring. We've already had last spring, and just some autumn calvers test. This is the second prototype, the one that's downstairs. So we'll be at field days. You and anyone else can go into the draw to get one of 7 that we've got made up. So no preferences, but I don't know. Chris would know more. Chris from QCons. Look, Kia could make one tomorrow if they wanted to. So I don't know whether they.
Yeah, it's going to be driven by demand basically, and we're going to field days to really establish what the demand is to support Kia in producing these commercially. So, but they definitely see this as an opportunity for them.
Yeah, I mean there's some great benefits being funded by ACC, but also you're being looked at by ACC and WorkSafe. So we've had some feedback about, have you had an ergonomics specialist look at this, and so we have to kind of take a bit of proper process with testing it out before we sort of say we fully back it. But it'll be ready to go soon, Chris. Yeah. Was there a question at the back too?
Yeah, I was just wondering with the reduction in, I can yell, with the reduction in the milking windows, if any other outputs were measured, like if there was an increase in sort of labour demand on the farm, or if there was an increase or decrease in any other metrics other than milk production.
Short answer is in those studies, no. That was all about milk production. I guess you are potentially compressing your day, and that makes that day busier. So there could be some trade-offs if we don't tick some of the other boxes about also getting more efficient at the same time to offset that essentially. But look, there's this workplace productivity survey, like there's a lot of opportunities now to dig in. We've got data sets now to start digging into answering those questions with a bit more detail, because yes, we all know that farms are systems, and you change one thing and there could be other benefits or not, as the case may be in other areas. So it is important to understand those trade-offs.
Anyone else?
So you do find all these extra hours in terms of productivity and stuff. I guess what on farms are they finding to fill some of that time? Or have there been any, like say the farms that are using that stuff, has there been any stats on, I guess, staff turnover and profitability?
No, we did a. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the earlier comment that in an ideal world, we would easily just choose from the people that are lining up to work. Essentially, it's more focused at making it easier to find people and keep people on farm. I guess the... Yeah. In the project we did around flexible milking, we looked at some of those factors. We looked at well-being and then staff retention and engagement questions and things. One of the most, I would have thought the most successful farms implementing flexible milking had the worst staff retention, because in a team of about 5 people, one finished their OE and went back home, one went to another job. So retention is a really difficult metric. You kind of need a sector-wide measure rather than a farm by farm, because we've got such small teams.
You need a pretty big data set to start looking at those things.
That's the challenge there. Yeah. I mean, the workforce productivity survey, I guess what we're looking for in that is there are a few key things that we can follow that can actually put into dairy base, and get asked if you're doing a certain level of dairy base around your staff, and you could be asking about like retention and then relating, okay, the ones that have got really good retention on a whole, on average, what are they doing on their farms? Yeah, are they having more time for their team and things like that? So,
like I feel like I've said a few times today, there's a whole lot of trade-offs, right? And so as a researcher, I'd love to go and ask, add another 5 questions to the annual thing that you fill out for Fonterra, or run another survey that will take 20 minutes of your time to answer questions of, to try and do that. But I guess it's a matter of priorities and trying to use people's time effectively, and at the moment we haven't.
Yeah. I mean, the other way to look at, if you are retaining people, there is a calculator on the DairyNZ website about what's the cost of turnover. And every time someone leaves, there's tens of thousands of dollars in finding someone, covering the work while they're away. So if you're kind of paying them a little extra, but they're staying, how does that balance with what if they leave? Yeah.
Sorry, I've just heard you talk about flexible milking a couple of times. Can you explain to me what that is?
I do that one. So flexible milking it was a project that we've ran for the last 3 years. Finished 6 months or so ago, and essentially we kind of use it as a catch-all term for everything that sits between once a day and twice a day. So those are kind of very well understood and established systems. There's a whole lot of different kind of options that can sit between those two, like 11 and 7, 9 and 7, 10 and 7. And you get 3 and 2. It's essentially a catch-all for those different options. Yeah.
So it wasn't just people milking whenever they wanted.
Not quite as unstructured as that. No, there's still a pattern and a routine. And
I'll answer a question. On the weekends I milk at 7:30, and on the weekdays I milk at 6 o'clock. Cups on. The reason I do it on the weekdays at 6, you get the truck turning up, you got your vets going, all those things. On the weekend I milk once a day. So that's the flexibility, and it doesn't make any difference to the milk. Or like it was Anzac Day, so I milk at 7:30. It's more sweet.
Yeah, good.
Right, any other questions? Yeah, I think we're timing pretty good, so I'd like to say thank you very much to these guys.